Hello all and welcome, and I am the MGTOW Philosopher. And in this video, I would like to bring you all a very somber story about a man who actually cared about and championed other men. He had a lot of compassion for his fellow man, and he spent his life trying to help men. And for that, he was forced to destitution and eventual suicide. So this man who ran Canada. Of course, everyone out there who is not in the know, Canada is one of the perhaps most feminist countries on earth, if not the most feminist country, probably right behind Sweden. Maybe they tie each other. I don't know if Canada has tried any feminist snowplowing lately, but they're very closely tied for slots number 1 and number 2. So man who ran Canada's only shelter dedicated solely to male victims of domestic abuse dies in apparent suicide. The day after he packed up his recently sold home, yes, he had to sell his home. He had dedicated his whole life to helping men. He got no help from anyone, anywhere, so he had to sell his house. Also, the site of the men's alternative safe house, Earl Silverman, was found hanging in his garage. So let's get to the meat of the story, shall we? The man who created Canada's only shelter dedicated solely to male victims of domestic violence died on Friday of an apparent suicide. The day after he packed up his recently sold home, also the site of the men's alternative safe house, Earl Silverman was found hanging in his garage. 20 years ago, Earl Silverman of Calgary, fleeing his home to escape violence from his abusive wife. Something you don't hear very much about, of course, because the media hides these things. It doesn't inform the public that you're actually more likely to be abused by your wife than a wife is to be abused by her husband. He had no refuge to take shelter in. There were plenty of shelters for women, victims of domestic abuse. Sure, if you're somebody who wants to start a private shelter, it'll be very easy for you in Canada to get help, to get funding from the state. If you want to start a men's shelter, you will get zero. But for men, the only publicly funded services were for anger management. Yeah, men are less violent than women, but they need more help with their anger. Yes, further reinforcing the stereotype, the lie that men are somehow out of control and abusive. The article goes on to say, the message was clear to Silverman. As a victim, I was re-victimized by having these services telling me I wasn't a victim, I was a perpetrator, and by the fact that there was no help available for you. 3 years ago in his own home, Silverman opened the men's alternative safe house, MASH. Good for you, my friend. Takes a lot of courage, a lot of balls to do such a thing, which until last week held the distinction of being the only privately funded shelter for male victims of domestic abuse in Canada. So you know there's no way the state is going to fund that. It would put a spotlight on victims of female abuse, abuse at the hands of women. The state is never going to put a spotlight on that. It will never, ever provide any funding for such a thing. It's only going to provide funding for the things women want because women are the majority of voters, because men die sooner or are killed by women sooner. Now, with no public funds to help, the maintenance and grocery bills associated with running the shelter have become too onerous for him to handle. Silverman has sold his home. Mr. Silverman closed his shelter last month, saying he could no longer afford its upkeep. Yeah, he had to pay for this entire shelter out of his own pocket. Every other women's shelter out there gets tons and tons of public money. But for some reason, he's not getting any public money. Well, we know the reason, because he's helping men. Helping men is not allowed. It doesn't fit with the current PC narrative of men being the oppressors and abusers. They don't need help. Oh, no, they're the ones creating victims who need help. He long sought funding from provincial and federal governments to help run his hybrid shelter and home, but believed he was always refused because the space was dedicated to helping male victims. Well, what other reason? Look at all the other female shelters out there. They all have females, and they all have public funding. Male victims and their children. He said he was able to pay for heat and grocery bills. Yeah, he's supporting it all out of his own pocket. All these people. Steve Howard purchased Mr. Silverman's house and said he helped the advocate move his belongings on Thursday. I couldn't have predicted this. I got the sense that he was pretty frustrated that the shelter didn't work out. He was frustrated with the government, that he didn't get any help. Mr. Howard said on Saturday. Mr. Howard is apparently the guy that bought the house from him. And I guess he has some part to play in the story. Let's continue reading. Mr. Howard came back to the house the next day and found only Mr. Silverman's roommate. We got to talking about keys, and he said, I think this is the garage and this is the front door and whatnot, Mr. Howard said. Mr. Howard then said I would go try the garage, but the door was already open. That's when I found him there. Mr. Howlett said they called for help, but it was too late. Mr. Silverman's brown house in an established neighborhood of northeast Calgary held little more than a few white boxes and a backyard stuffed with torn single mattresses and old bedroom furniture from his shelter. Yeah, I would imagine a torn mattress. There's no money to get anything new or decent in quality. He was frustrated with the government. They didn't get any help. Several weeks ago, he told the Post that he himself had been the victim of abuse at the hands of his ex-wife. Nobody takes it seriously, of course. Oh, you're a man, you're big, you're strong. You couldn't be harmed by a woman. Bullshit. His experience inspired him to become involved in men's rights groups en masse. Don't do that. They'll drive you to kill yourself. No question about that. Goes on to say, when I went into the community looking for some support services, I couldn't find any. There were a lot of women, and the only programs for men were for anger management, Mr. Silverman told the Post shortly before his death. As a victim, I was re-victimized by having these services telling me I wasn't a victim, I was a perpetrator. After he left his wife more than 20 years ago, Mr. Silverman said he spiraled into self-abuse, living on Johnny Walker and cigarettes. Oh, but men aren't victims. No, men aren't oppressed. They're oppressors. I basically tried to commit suicide because I couldn't do anything. No help available. But hey, he's a man. The patriarchy is helping and protecting him, but there's no services for him. Huh, that's a crappy patriarchy. And here's a picture of him in front of his house that he can no longer afford because he spent the past several years spending all his money and time trying to help other men who were victims. Yeah, that son of a bitch. Oh, he's got to pay. So the story continues. Tom Maddie lived in Mr. Silverman's basement for the past several months. I knew Earl was battling a lot of demons. Him and me could get along well because I was battling a lot of the same ones. He hit a point where it just became too much, Mr. Maddie said. I don't know what to tell you. It's come as a bit of a surprise. Yeah, well, not having money or resources at all because you're trying to help other people. And by the way, this is why I preach against altruism to this extent, to where you're sacrificing your own happiness. He really shouldn't have done this. I mean, I'm not blaming the victim, but you should look after yourself. And if the state's not going to help you, what are you going to do? I mean, this guy's now dead. He's dead. His life is over. He can't help anybody now. And this is why I preach against unrestrained altruism, by the way. He hit a point where it just came too much. I don't know what to tell you. It all came as a bit of a surprise. Both Mr. Howard and Mr. Natty said Mr. Silverman left a 4-page suicide note. Wow. 4 pages. But where is it? Where's the note? Why isn't it in this story? Oh, the media and the government essentially are hiding it. You'll probably never see that note. It's evidence. Yeah. 4-page suicide note blaming the government for failing to recognize male victims of domestic abuse. It's probably why he killed himself, so he could bring light to this problem. Earl understood that the first step to helping people recover from things like domestic abuse is providing them with that low-level, safe place to be, Mr. Maddie said. MASH opened about 3 years ago when the shelter hosted about 20 men fleeing abusive situations, including some children. Oh, but women can't be abusers. Oh, no, impossible. Goes on to say, Mr. Silverman ran the sanctuary out of his own funds. You want to talk about unrestrained altruism. What he did was kind and noble, but foolhardy. He should have taken care of himself. I'm sorry, buddy, you should have. Oh, my God. I feel so sorry for this guy, though. I mean, honestly, he was just trying to help. Mr. Silverman ran the sanctuary out of his own funds, failing to raise significant amounts from either government or private donations. Unbelievable! What is it with you people out there? Don't you think men suffer too? Or you just don't care? They're nothing more than plow horses to be used and then discarded once they're burned out, used up. Why is it women are so easy to see as victims, but men, it's so freaking hard? We're both supposed to be human beings, right? You're all about equality, right? Oh, you fucking feminists, you're all about equality, right? Well, if you're all about equality, doesn't that mean that men suffer equally as much as women? Oh, no. No. That's not the case. Men suffer less than women. That's really? Really? Is that a fact? Well, clearly that's a fact if you go by feminist ideology. Yeah, right. Ay. This stuff really pisses me off. Goes on to say, he was a very caring person, very emotional, very direct and honest. He believed very much in fairness and justice. He shouldn't have, because they don't exist. For sure they don't. And he was just staggered constantly that over a period of 20 years is something that's so simple and so logical as gender rights and equality would be so impossible to... rights under... Now, this is where men and women should be equal, under the law. Under the law. Not necessarily in their rights, because rights are nothing more than privileges, and privileges are earned, and women haven't earned a lot of the privileges they have and that they have fought to get. via unfair means, manipulating the law by being the majority of voters, getting what they want, and depriving men of the help they need, which is clearly the case here. Yeah. But, pal, you're not going to find equality under the law or fairness or justice for men. He never thought that would be so impossible to access for so many people. Mr. Silverman was well-known and outspoken member of the men's rights community. Oh, big mistake. That movement, the men's rights movement, is a joke. They are totally without any power or influence. They will accomplish nothing. They have accomplished nothing to date. His death has sparked outrage and sadness among those who are pushing for greater recognition of men's issues in law and family court. Good luck. As the politicians don't care about that stuff. They only care about who's voting. If it's women that are overwhelmingly voting, they're not going to do a goddamn thing about men's issues. It'll never show up in the media either, because the media is controlled by the left, by women, by feminists, so nobody's going to know about this stuff anyway. An online radio station called A Voice for Men broadcast a tribute to Mr. Silverman on Saturday night, said James Huff, the director of operations. Goes on to say, he meant a lot to those in Canada. Specifically, Mr. Huff said, he was the only person in Canada who had the dream of doing what he did. He was the only guy to recognize a problem with the fact that men were not receiving the type of support they needed to overcome domestic violence situations. In his note, Mr. Silverman also said he hoped his death would bring more awareness to the issue of male abuse. He left no family. So this is a perfect example of a man driven to suicide through his very attempts to help other men. The system will do this to you. Don't become a sacrificial lamb. Live for yourself. Promote the ideas of men's rights and returning men to being actual men. But going out of your way like this to try and do all this, it's not going to lead anywhere. You're not going to, I mean, I laud this guy. I laud him for doing what he did. He should be lauded for what he tried to do. But I could have told you from the start it would end this way. There's no government in the Western world that's going to give any money to helping men ever. Not going to happen. No, and I think he could have done more for men if he would have had stayed alive. Okay, and he could have done a lot, but just not spent so much of his own money. My God. But this really shouldn't be about attack. And I'm not attacking the guy. What I'm trying to do is give you guys a lesson here that this is what happens when you try to be one of these MRAs and go out and try to affect change through all these actions. That's not going to help, because the system is too biased against men. You have to go MGTOW, and you have to do things the way most MGTOW are doing them. Red pill as many men as you possibly can until enough men's minds change that they stop supporting this corrupt system. That's the only way you're going to change things, not through what he did. And again, he should be lauded for what he did, but he failed to recognize the reality that he was not, will never, ever get help for a men's shelter, men's anything, men's rights, whatever. You will not get any aid from the government, period. If you did, they would be acknowledging that men have problems, and then men would need help. And then money that could be going to women would be going to men, and women won't have that. Even if there's more help than they need, they want everything. They don't want you to have anything. They should have all available, because for millennia they were oppressed and they were victims, and now it's our turn to see what it feels like, whatever, even though they never really were victims to begin with. It's just a bullshit narrative that they have swallowed that allows them to justify taking over power and destroying Western civilization. Bunch of fools. So let me know what you think of this story in the comments section about how the Canadian feminist government, led by a former ski instructor with a nice smile and good caps on his teeth, have destroyed this poor man whose only mission in life is to try to help other men. Please like and subscribe, and if you would, donate to my Patreon. You'll find a link in both the description and the last 20 seconds of this video. I am the MGTOW Philosopher, and I wish you a good day. Take care.